The Nintendo GameCube is a console that falls right in the middle of retro classic territory and the mainstream modern day. As a result, I feel like it gets overlooked a lot, and in regards to unreleased and cancelled material, that couldn't be truer. For every high-tier mystery like Zelda 64 and Mother 3, there's an obscure GameCube equivalent, like Peach's Castle or Stage Debut, a cancelled GameCube game that was intended to be released in 2004 as a full-fledged, peripheral-based experience, but never ended up coming out due to a number of different factors. So while we may never be able to experience Stage Debut, we can definitely take a look at what the game had going for it and get a sense of this wacky adventure. Stage Debut was first announced at E3 2002 and was heavily showcased to the public the following year in 2003. The only known visuals we have from this game include a handful of screenshots, likely from a press release, and 2 videos showcasing different features the game has to offer. Upon first glance, the 2 biggest features that stick out are the really low quality of graphics and also the absurdity of the situations. There's a good explanation for these oddities, beginning with the graphics. While yes, this would technically be an early beta of the game, at its core, Stage Debut is often called the spiritual successor of Mario Artist's Talent Studio, which released on the Nintendo 64 DD, so the visuals could have been created with a similar game like that in mind. Additionally, just as Talent Studio used its own peripherals, such as the Game Boy camera and N64 capture cassette, the human characters in Stage Debut were customized avatars created by uploading your face into the game via an all-new peripheral for the Game Boy Advance, called the Game Eye. So I bet in some way, the consistency in each unique character may not have been up to par quite yet. But the avatars aside, the franchise characters seem to reuse assets, so you may be inclined to think Nintendo was just using whatever was around. However, these choices were not random, but in fact, Stage Debut was also planned to make use of the GBA's other peripheral, the e-reader. As demonstrated in this video, you could scan in Animal Crossing e-reader cards to add the villagers into the game. Pikmin and Mario did have e-reader card sets released for them too, and right around the same time Stage Debut was in development, so this would have probably been the primary way to get the characters into the game. But now that everyone's here, what is there to do? Well, the point of Stage Debut is again similar to that of Talent Studio, with a little bit more depth from the looks of it. Essentially, its goal was to put the player into a fun environment to interact with Nintendo characters and live a wacky life or go on adventures. We've only ever seen the stage, playground, and classroom environments despite a whole world map existing. The classroom environment also never appeared in video, and can only be seen in these screenshots. This definitely does sound a lot like Animal Crossing or Tomodachi Life. And in fact, it's been said that elements from Stage Debut have found their way into other Nintendo games. Shigeru Miyamoto himself stated in an IGN interview that this game was the inspiration for the Mii's and the Mii channel as well. So really you have played Stage Debut, it just wasn't in its original form, because unfortunately this creative and entertaining game did not return to E3 2004, and in fact it never returned in this form again. The game was cancelled in 2004 due to a number of different reasons, but even a retail release wouldn't have been an easy money ride for Nintendo anyway. The primary reason why Stage Debut was cancelled is contributed to the fact that the Game Eye peripheral never released, and nothing similar ever came out for the GBA. At this rate, the game would have lost its primary purpose. I can't find much information on the Game Eye other than how it would have locked onto the GBA like a normal cart, but from what I've read, the peripheral was essentially an updated Game Boy camera, and was made purposely for use with Stage Debut. Had it actually released, Nintendo maybe could have found a way to implement it into other games, but I bet its cancellation mostly had to do with their stance on GBA peripherals. As stated earlier, this game definitely would have relied on e-reader support, and in the US, the e-reader was discontinued in 2004, which would have been right around the time Stage Debut released. So releasing a game requiring a dead peripheral would have been a disaster, and even taking the chance that a new card set would boost sales enough, or that people would find enough use in their old cards is not a gamble Nintendo of America would have taken at that time. It's for this reason I theorize the game wouldn't have even been localized outside of Japan had it released, since the e-reader did well in Japan. We also never saw the Pikmin 2 e-reader cards in the US, so I bet the inclusion of the Pikmin in the game at all was a hint at compatibility, and is more reason why it likely wouldn't have released in the US. Pretend a Japanese-only release was on track, as earlier gaming websites said it was. I bet Nintendo grew tired of this concept generally speaking, since they're known for cancelling games that lack direction or purpose, and since this game was really a sandbox game, it might not have been favored at some point in development. because I imagine Nintendo could have easily released the Game Eye or some kind of replacement if they really wanted to, so I think the lack of desire was part of stage debut's cancellation. All things considered, the circumstances between E3 2003 and the stance on peripherals seemed like it really hindered the release of this game. Perhaps that explains the $40 price tag versus the normal $50 price tag at the time. Nintendo probably knew this was going to be a costly game between all of the hookups and cards, and that most people wouldn't bother with it, so at some point they could have just said forget it. Had it released as intended on the GameCube with the GBA Game Eye, I'm sure it'd be a real fun novelty to look back on now, and I'd probably be having some fun with it. But all in all, it would have required a lot of effort to get the full experience back in the day, and even with updated graphics it definitely wouldn't have been anything to rave about, especially with all of the main first-party titles releasing around it. So until the true vision of Stage Debut ever gets released, or if we can learn more about its development and secrets, it'll definitely remain a mystery.